If you guys need any cards, packs, sleeves, anything of that nature, shop on TCG Player using my affiliate link in the description. What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to yet another Edison format tier list. I do like a few of these big ones a year where we go over the entire metagame. So this is probably going to be the final one for the fall, going into Ribbit Rulers, getting my thoughts out there. I tried to get as comprehensive as of a list of decks as I could, just like about everything, even vaguely sort of tangentially meta relevant. I've also got deck lists for every deck, because people have said that they like when we cover those and like talk about the lists a little bit as well, and just show what the lists are. A lot of that is kind of helpful for newer players. We've split the tiers into 5 different tiers here. I kind of did it weird, like adding tier 1.5, tier 2.5. I just felt it's like better to think about Edison as being like tier 1 to 3 rather than being tier 1 to 5, because like the difference in power between decks is a lot lower than maybe in later formats, like in Modern, where if you're playing some jank deck, you basically can't win, or you win like 5% of the time or something ridiculous like that. So it's just kind of helpful for me thinking about it like that, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, we've got like 31 lists to cover here. I think 31 is what it came out to. So we better jump right in and get started. First off, we have, I think this is referring to what we call regular fairy, I guess. It just sort of is like the standard list, I guess, or at least the OG, like Keegan fairy kind of list, where you play, you play all the good cards. You play the Christias, you play the Orange Light Honest, you play all the Recruiters, you play the Demox, and then you throw in like some number of Freed and Soul and like random Raikos. Triple Book of Moon, always. I think that is very good. And then there's like a full kind of trap lineup with usually just bottomless on top of all that. And there's like an Oppression in here, which isn't uncommon to see. There's been a lot of weird like text lately with the fairy deck. I've seen so many people playing like random like side deck cards in the main, like pulling the rugs and kaikus, and even weird stuff like soul release and purple light. And I don't really think any of it's good. Also, Thunder King main is quite common. I don't think that's very good either. Mainly, my gripe with this deck is that I think it is just worse than playing Chaos Fairy, which we'll get to that later when I talk about that deck. But I think there's just like a lot of weird flaws with the builds that people make of this deck. So I'm going to put it down in tier 1.5. It's still really good. Like, Christia is still insane. Orange Light Honest is still insane. I just don't like these non-decree builds. I don't like all the weird, like, random Freed and Thunder King and stuff like that. I just think they're bad monsters to be playing. I do like Triple Book of Moon. I like that a lot, but I think my overall take on this version of the fairy deck is that it's suboptimal, so I'm putting it at 1.5. Next up, we move over to Amaryllis. Let's see what we got. Like, with a lot of these decks, there's like various ways you can build them, obviously. I'm not referring to any specific Amaryllis build here. This just happens to be mine. Amaryllis. This one has definitely emerged pretty recently as like a sort of vague meta threat. I think tier 1.5 is probably a reasonable place to put it. It's definitely not tier 1, right? It's not like topping at the level of Heroes or Blackwings or whatever. But I think the deck is very strong. There's a lot of powerful things going on there. Obviously, I think it's definitely become clear to me recently that this is the best plant deck. It was kind of always clear to me that this was the case, but there was a time when people were experimenting with the Twilight and the Power Tools and the weird other plant decks, and I think those decks are like alright. I just think Amaryllis is a lot better in terms of synergizing with that whole Mark of the Rose DDR engine. And the Mark of the Rose DDR really are the most powerful aspects of the plant deck for sure in Edison format. And it also is the version of the deck that spams Titanial the most, and Titanial can be really strong too. So I think Amaryllis has a lot of things going for it. I think it has a very good hero beat matchup. The Blackwing matchup can be iffy, especially if you don't play Volcanic Counter. The Frog matchup is insane. So it's got a decent matchup spread. It's a pretty solid, strong deck. I'm going to put it in 1.5. KFC, this list that I have here is like a little outdated. I haven't really done anything with this deck since I played it in June. I played it in War League once, I guess. There's been a lot of like recent innovations with people playing versions with Light and Darkness Dragon, and I think those look really cool. I think the Frog version with Light and Darkness Dragon looks really solid as well. I'm just kind of not sure. I haven't actually had the chance to test with them that much. So I think I'm going to go ahead and throw KFC kind of in this middle tier. I'm just not really sure where I'm at on it right now. I might end up doing a video on like some of the Light and Darkness Dragon builds because I think those look really neat. And then maybe I'll sort of draw some conclusions from that. But right now, I'm not confident putting it anywhere really higher than this. I think it's probably better than these lowest two tiers, just because these are going to be the kind of garbage decks. But maybe tier 2.5 if you really hate it. But I'm gonna throw it in tier 2, maybe low tier 2. I'm just kind of unsure where I stand on KFC right now, actually. So I think the middle tier is fine for it. Next up, we have Lightsworn. Specifically, this is the new like pure Lightsworn build that's been going around with Glorious Illusion and like main deck Cyber Dragon, playing maxed out or not quite maxed out Hamster Raikou. I think pretty much every Lightsworn build needs to be on 3 Hamster, 3 Raikou, or 2 Hamster, 3 Raikou is like basically just as good. The Wolf is like a weird card. I do think that it's probably better than the Christia build, which, once again, we'll talk about this more when we get to the Christia build. But this version of Lightsworn actually plays mills that do something by themselves, which I think is good. Yeah, triple Christia, triple Wolf with the Hamster Raikou is definitely solid. I mean, this really is like become the definitive pure Lightsworn build. There's a lot of things about that I think are very good, very scary. But then sometimes it's just like, feels like complete garbage. I guess Lightsworn decks will always be like that. They're a little bit high rolly in nature. It just depends. As for this, I think I'm going to be throwing it in 1.5 as well. Tier 1.5 might end up being really big, actually. Yeah, I could foresee that happening for sure. I think there's a lot of decks on here that I'm going to be putting in this tier. Lightsworn, probably both Lightsworn decks are going to go on here. I think this is like the best Lightsworn build right now. I'm not sure it's the best one conceivable, but I don't really know where to go with Lightsworn from here. It's not a deck I think a whole lot about, but tier 1.5, sure. Hero Beat. We have our first entrant into tier 1 for sure. I mean, this deck is the deck to beat right now. This deck is everywhere. It's super consistent, super powerful. Very hard to deal with, very versatile, no real like bad matchups, very good Blackwing matchup, which is important in Edison format for obvious reasons. Also a pretty good Frog matchup, also very important in Edison format. So, I mean, Hero Beat's just about as good as it's going to get right now in terms of decks. So I think no one would object to tier 1 for that one. All right, X-Sabers. What do we got? The build I have for this is really weird because this deck's only topped like where it's got like 9th at one Peak of the Beak, and that's about all it's ever done ever in Edison format. So do I think tier 3, tier 2.5, maybe 2.5? It can go off and like sack every now and then, but it's not very good. Just suffers from extreme inconsistency, like loses super hard to a lot of the aggro decks that are out there right now. Bad matchup into Blackwings, bad matchup into Hero Beat, even bad matchup into like Frogs too. It's just its matchup spread is terrible. It's inconsistent. It's just kind of a high roll sack combo deck, which I guess is the one thing keeping it out of tier 3 is the fact that it can just like be super overpowered sometimes if they draw the God Hand. But the God Hand it doesn't happen very much because we don't have Dark Soul and whatnot in Edison. So yeah. 2.5. Sorry, X-Saber fans. Who we got next here? Diva Hero. This one is like solid 1.5, right? This is almost like the definitive 1.5 for me. When I think of like decks that are just almost tier 1 but not quite, I think Diva Hero generally. Obviously, a True Hero's top of this deck a lot. It's got a reasonable level of tops. I just don't think it's quite on the level of tier 1 decks. I don't know where it's at in terms of representation, but it definitely performs pretty well. You could maybe even... Nah, I think 1.5 is probably the most reasonable place to put it. Maybe top of 1.5. It definitely tops pretty frequently. I mean, it's got, what, maybe half a dozen tops this year in terms of major events. So, I think Diva Hero is definitely a solid deck. It's got a lot going for it. The high roll hands are crazy. Sometimes you do brick, and that can be the Diva Hero experience with the Malleys and you just draw like useless hands with weird combinations of cards. It's definitely a thing that can happen. But sometimes you go crazy as well. So yeah, I mean the deck can be really strong. Miracle Fusion's really strong. It's probably kind of just like not as good as Hero Beat though, because you're trading a lot of your like defense and consistency for essentially a higher ceiling, and I'm not exactly sure that's a worthwhile trade-off in Edison format, but obviously the deck is still very strong. 1.5. Next up we got Welidad. So where do we feel on Welidad? This is a deck that is like the second best zombie build, and zombies have kind of fallen off the map a good bit. I might not even end up putting them in tier 1, so there's no way this is going in tier 1. It's probably 1.5. Maybe like low end of 1.5. I think Welidad has just been nowhere. Zombies in general have been nowhere, but to the extent they've been anywhere, it's been the Diva build. So the fact that the Diva build is just like even marginally better kind of really hurts this deck, I think. Like bottom of 1.5 is about as generous as I can be, despite the fact that I really like it. I really like that this sort of Teledad variant is playable in Edison. I just can't really justify putting it higher based on performance. I mean, it's got like one top ever. I mean, that in terms of events that I've actually know of. Maybe it topped that IRL event I covered recently. I mean, it's got maybe like every now and then it gets a top, but that's about all it really gets. Representation maybe not great either, but I think we're being about as friendly to Welidad as we can here, so yeah. Speaking of zombies, here we have Diva Zombies. This is the more standard zombie build, I guess. I think this is one of beast modes. You got the recruiters, you got all the zombie package, of course. You've got the Divas, you got the Book of Lives, the Return, all that stuff. A lot of people like the main deck Dust Tornado in here. I think this deck's pretty good. It's just like been nowhere to be found recently. Maybe I'll put it top of tier 1.5. I definitely feel like the meta has shifted in a way where zombies are just gone. I just don't know why. Like, I haven't heard a good explanation for it yet. So, the deck, like, seems solid to me, but it's definitely been performing worse. So, I think I will change my expectations according to that. I could bump it down this tier, but I think it's got to be top of 1.5 because the zombies are still an insanely powerful deck. They're just maybe not qualified for tier 1 anymore. It's hard to say because like the meta shifts a lot. This could just be a flash of the pan thing in terms of zombies not topping much recently. Maybe they'll be back full force in a month and we'll be like, oh, zombies, they're the best deck. It could happen. But within the current metagame, probably gonna have to stick them here. Next up, we got Vayu Turbo. This deck is just like a super consistent topper, probably one of the most, so it has to be tier 1. I mean, there's just like a Vayu top at every event, right? Very strong deck, very consistent deck, does a lot of cool stuff. They can put big guys on the board, aggro the opponent down, they can play a sort of control game with the Hamster Raikou Caius. They're just a good stuff pile. Like they're like the good stuff pile of Edison format. They got all the dark stuff that was crazy in this time period. They got Dad, Allure, Greffer, Armageddon Knight. They've just got, and then they've got like all the good mill cards with the Hamster Raikou. They've got the Trooper. They've got the Caius, of course, staple of Edison format. They could even play Royal Oppression, which can be very strong. And standard good defensive lineup, all that stuff. Vayu, good deck. So tier 1 for sure. Next up, we got Quick Draw. This deck's kind of tragic. So there's like multiple builds of this deck that go around, which is the case, as I mentioned before, for several of these. You can play the Volcanic, like, Rocket build. You can play builds with the Kree. You could play the Joshua Schmidt build with Treacherous Travel and the Hero package. I think they're all pretty decent. They just struggle really hard with, like, Blackwings specifically, and Blackwings are a tier 1 deck that's like a fifth of the meta, and it's a huge issue for you if your deck just gets owned by them. That being said, I'm maybe a little higher on this deck than other people. I don't know. I think I'll put it in 2 actually. I might like in my dreams maybe 1.5, but realistically 2. I think this deck just kind of has issues right now. It hasn't been performing at all lately. I can't think of a quick draw top in recent memory. If there was one, it's just like one here or there. Kind of, it's not really had any kind of breakout moment in the metagame. So sadly, much to my chagrin, quick draw, one of the coolest decks in the format, just hasn't really been doing much lately. So it's got to go down, I think, in tier 2. Next up, we have Dark Gaia. Common theme here. There's a lot of ways you can play this deck. The most common one is the hero one that you see on the screen here. Obviously, I've been messing around with a lot of different rock builds, which are very untested at the moment, so we're not going to be commenting based on those. But the hero build is like not particularly good. It's definitely the worst hero deck in the meta. Like, if you can even consider this in the meta. It has maybe one top. Every now and then it's bubbled. Yeah, I think 2.5 if we're being realistic. I could put it in 2. I do think Dark Gaia is a card that has a lot of potential. It's just like Dark Calling into Dark Gaia is a very good play. It does a lot. It's like pretty unique. A lot of decks do not have the ability to just randomly end the game with some 4K dude that negates flip effects and stuff. So the card is solid. And the concept is solid. It just like hasn't manifested in any way that seems particularly good to me yet. So unfortunately, this is another one that feels bad for me because I love rocks, but I'm gonna have to put it back down in 2.5 until it like further proves itself in any way here. Yeah, unfortunate for all the Dark Gaia fans out there, of which I am one, but deck just really hasn't done much. So yeah, 2.5. Who we got next? Oh, next we got Cat. All right, so. There's a lot of ways you can build Cat. I've said this a lot. I'm going to continue to say it a lot with a lot of these decks, but this is just the plant version that Snack likes to play. It's the 40 card build. I think she has like a 44, which we're not going to be talking about, but yeah, just in general, Cat, like Synchro Cat decks are not very good, right? I mean, they have basically no tops as far as I'm aware. There's like a 9th place finish. There's a lot of 9th place finishes for this deck, actually, if I recall. But yeah, a lot of 9th place finish. Maybe tier 2. I don't know about that. 2.5 kind of seems like it's more realistic. Maybe I should. I could put this and Gaia up here. No, I think it is kind of just like a good stuff pile, though. In a way that X-Saber's isn't, even though X-Saber's ceiling is higher. So maybe I can justify putting it in tier 2. Yeah, it just has like a lot of issues. Matchup-wise, it has a lot of issues too. Like Blackwings is a bad matchup, and Frogs is a bad matchup. A Hero Beat's not a great matchup either, I don't think. So, yeah, I'm not feeling the Cat deck too much. I think we'll be generous and put it in 2, but it's probably like low end of 2 realistically. All right, next up we've got Dragon Turbo. This deck's been popping off a lot lately. Maybe enough for me to put it in tier 1. Actually, I think I will. Well, like this card or this deck kind of swaps places with zombies, I think, in the current metagame. Definitely, it's been like winning a lot of tournaments just straight up recently. First place, Dragon Turbo. I think Ghost Rider either won or topped with it recently. It won that one Ribbit IRL. So Dragon Turbo seems like it's kind of having its moment in the sun again. I don't know if that's going to change, but deck's really strong. Deck's performing well. I think the Reckless Greed sort of discovery has been extremely beneficial for this deck. Even like the Vortex Troopers stuff in terms of boosting your consistency and trying to kind of compensating for your flaws has definitely been quite helpful. So yeah, very, very good metagame right now for Dragon Turbo. I think tier 1 is definitely warranted. All right, on to Flambeaus. This deck has just been nowhere to be found since the beginning of time. So it's just like, can I really justify? I guess we could put it in 2.5, maybe. What's going to be in tier 3, actually? There's got to be just some like complete garbage deck on here that I could put in tier 3. We'll think about that later. Maybe like bottom of 2.5 for Flambeau. The deck's just nowhere. It doesn't do it. It's like very. I mean, just look at this build. It's got 2010 written all over it. We're on Spy Descendant. We're playing like, the just like a pile of sort of flip monsters. Loses hard to frogs. Loses hard to just like a lot. Loses hard to itself being just like a suboptimal kind of build. Now, there is like a good stuff aspect to it though that makes it not complete dog shit. Maybe I could put it above Sabers, possibly. Maybe I say it's the best in tier 2.5. I don't know. I think Flambeau has some serious issues, and it's kind of reflected in the fact that it's not played and doesn't win. So 2.5. Who we got? We got Makina. All right. This deck I think is very solid. I think this is like near top of tier 1.5. The Makina engine is just so inherently strong. I mean, Fortress is a crazy boss monster. Like Gearframe's a crazy normal summon. You got your own in-engine Stratos. Force is just like Force isn't particularly good. You only have it for a Monster Reborn for Fortress. It's basically part of the Fortress package. But yeah, I think the builds with the Raikou, Hamster, Caius, and then Avarice have become a lot more refined lately. I think I've talked about this, but the decks are definitely improving. The builds have become very, very sort of polished and solid, and I think that the like inherent power of the engine with like the good stuff, just very strong. Just makes for very strong decks. Cyber Dragon's kind of not in as many side decks lately either. A lot of Frog and Vayu players don't side that card. So I think Makina is in a pretty good spot right now. I'm gonna put it pretty high up here in tier 1.5. I think definitely deserved. This deck's just pretty good. So yeah. Ancient Gears. All right, I think we've got our first entry into into the bottom tier here. This deck sucks. This deck is so bad. Oh my god, I don't even like. If it weren't already on the tier list when I started editing it, I probably would have just removed this deck and not even talked about it. Like, it loses to everything. It loses to everything, okay? Oh, loses to any disruption, loses to like dupe lock, loses to so much. I mean, this build is like a weird one that topped at Deck Devastators 1 or something, and I played it once and it felt just like the worst thing ever, no one plays this deck. It doesn't do anything. Do I really got to justify my decision to put it in tier 3? Like, it's just bad. It's so garbage. So yeah, Disaster Dragon. So here we have Fitz's build, of course. I don't know what to say about it. It's Fitz's build. We've talked about it before. It's kind of just like a bunch of good stuff with some dragons and some future fusions. I'm not sure how I feel about this deck. Maybe tier 2. I think tier 2 is a reasonable place to put it. I don't think it's as good as these up here, really. But, like, if you draw Future Fusion, the deck is crazy for sure. And even when you don't draw it, you got, like, good stuff. So, yeah, I think tier 2. It's, like, performed above my expectations a lot this year, so I kind of have to bump it up a little bit. Yeah, Disaster Dragon, I think is, I think tier 2 is reasonable. Alright, who we got next? Norlers. So this is the Dragon build. There's also like the Vayu build out there and some crazy other builds that people have been experimenting with. I think the optimal build for Norlers probably hasn't been fully fleshed out yet. That being said, what do I think about the builds that are around right now? That's tough. I don't think 1.5 is... I don't think it's quite that high. Where do I put this? I'm probably not going to put it as low as I put it before, though, because it has had a kind of breakout moment within the meta in terms of people actually playing the deck at all, which is not where it was before. So maybe I put it up here in tier 2? Tier 2 is kind of just going to be my, like, unsure tier, isn't it? It sort of seems to be turning out like that. Yeah, I'm not really sure about this. It could go either direction in the coming months, where, like, maybe people figure out, like, the optimal build and it gets bumped up to here in tier 1.5. Maybe it just turned out to be some flavor of the month garbage, fad, and it goes down here. But for now, I'm going to leave it in tier 2. Frogs. This is a deck that's been a pretty constant feature within the meta. Although I should also note that Frogs doesn't top as much as people really think it does. I mean, it does top frequently, but not as much as like Hero Beat and Blackwings and Vayu Turbo and like the tier 1 and tier 1 adjacent sort of decks. Frogs more so performs on the level of what you would think a tier 1.5 deck would be. That being said, it is just such a constant force within the meta, and it has been topping more recently, I think, than it was in the first half of the year. So I think I'm going to put it up here in tier 1. I'm going to put it in the bottom of tier 1. I think it is like by far the weakest in tier 1 in terms of just being like super counterable in terms of matchups and side deck choices and whatnot. Post board can be a real struggle for Frogs. That being said, like what it does is so insanely strong, and sometimes it just feels unfair. And the deck, as I mentioned, has become just a constant within the meta. I think the hero build is very good, definitely. I think it's become sort of the definitive Frog build. We haven't seen so much of the non-hero builds doing much lately. So, and the hero engine and whatnot can compensate for a lot of your weaknesses in terms of lacking extenders and lacking guys that can beat over Fossil Dyna. So I think Hero Frog deserves to be tier 1. So it's going up in tier 1. Simple as that. Who we got next? Blackwings. Well, we were just talking about this. Blackwings are tier 1, right? Where am I going to put them in tier 1? I think Hero Beat needs to be higher, because Hero Beat, I think, is just like the number 1 deck right now. Plus, it destroys the head-to-head. What do I think? Do I think above Dragon Turbo? Probably above Dragon Turbo. Maybe. It depends. I think, like, depends a lot on the pilot. I'm going to put it above Turbo. It just has so many more tops. And kind of like Frogs, it is just a constant presence in the format. It will always be strong. Whirlwind's just a ridiculous card. It's got access to, like, Allure, Dad, so many power cards and auto-win buttons and whatnot. Let's look at the build. Oh, this is just Hydro Pumps from, like, PKW 4 or something. I don't remember, but, yeah, this is pure Blackwings. We're not going to be talking about a hybrid. Hybrid's not been played as much lately. Hardly at all. I think pure is just better. And hybrid's not that different anyway. Let's just... Pure Blackwings is tier 1. Like, we can all agree Pure Blackwings is tier 1, right? There's no objections to that. No, let's move on. Gladiator Beast. God, I hate this deck. Oh, I hate this deck so much. Well, every tier list we talk about how this deck has done nothing and has continued to do nothing. I'm going to be generous and say 2.5, but yeah, the deck just sucks. A lot of bad matchups, like Hero Beat Blackwings, you know, you can just scoop it up and go next. I mean, go next round, not next game. Like, there's no... Oh, the matchup spread is terrible, obviously. Like, within the current metagame, Hero Beat and Blackwings are everywhere. Those decks destroy you. Zombies has kind of fallen off, which was your one, like, cope matchup. The deck is just so... Why is this build on 2 War Chariot? Whose build is this? War Chariot is, like, your best card, man. Yeah, the difference between GBs when they open War Chariot and when they don't open War Chariot is, like, 2 tiers or something. It's crazy. All right, whatever. Whatever, we're not going to talk about that. Anyway, this deck is, like, very matchup dependent in a format that is super diverse, with a ton of matchups that you hard lose, and, like, it just doesn't do anything that great. It doesn't have a great power ceiling. It consistently fails to perform in like, every event, so, you know, 2.5, I'm not... If I was going to, like, truly unleash my Glad hater sentiment, I would put it down here, but I'll be fair and I'll put it here. All right. On to Twilight Plant. I was talking about this deck earlier as well. This is like the builds with the power tools and Twilight Rose Knight and the sort of plant chaos stuff. I don't think this deck is too bad. It's just kind of like worse than Amaryllis, which I mentioned earlier. Mark of the Rose is really good. Beyond that, you're not doing anything too crazy. I'd maybe put it in tier 2. It's probably better than this stuff down here, but it's... definitively, I think, a tier below Amaryllis in terms of who's the top dog with plant decks right now. So, yeah, that's where I'm putting Twilight Plants. On to Geminis. This deck emerged pretty recently. It's kind of just a crazy combo pile that can go off super hard. It's weird because they, like, set a lot of traps, but a lot of the traps they set don't actually interact much. It's like your traps are actually your combo pieces with the Ultimate Offering and the Reinforced Truth. This deck's weird. Sometimes it feels crazy and overpowered and ridiculous. Sometimes it just feels bad. Sometimes your opponent is an ass and decides super poly to make Raptinus, which a lot of people are doing. I guess people are scared of getting high rolled by the Gemini deck. It's never felt too intimidating when I play against it. When I played it, it didn't feel that good either. It is crazy when it goes off, though. I think, like, probably better than X-Sabers in terms of, like, a high roll deck. But where do I put it? I think tier 2 is, like... Yeah, I think we're going to put it in the uncertain tier. Tier 2 is probably pretty reasonable for... I'm going to put a question mark at the end of this tier. Yeah, tier 2 is probably reasonable. Like, it can be good, it can be bad. You know, tier 2, whatever. Moving on, who do we got? Christia Sworn. This has kind of fallen out of favor as the #1 Light Sworn build. Like I said, the ×2 Glorious Illusion thing with the wolves and stuff is a lot more impactful in terms of the metagame right now. I think the main reason, which I might have mentioned this before, is just like not having wolf, not having Necroguard. You're just milling a ton of cards, kind of hoping that it sets up your graveyard perfectly. You don't get any actual value out of your mills. And then, like, you're playing Celestia with no wolf just because it's a fairy Lightsworn, I guess, and you sort of have to. But you do have some good matchups. Like, you destroy frogs and whatnot, but the Blackwing and the Hero Beat matchups aren't particularly great. And then, like, it just can be awkward sometimes with, like, you mill all this stuff, and the mills don't actually do anything. You might open a hand that would be, like, crazy in normal Lightsworn, but it just doesn't do much in Christia Sworn because you don't actually mill anything that does anything, you know? That being said, the deck is still reasonably strong. It's still a Lightsworn build. Lightsworn is still pretty strong. It's still a Christia deck. Christia is pretty strong. I think I'm going to put it in 1.5. I definitely think it is below the other fairy builds and the other Lightsworn builds, but it's still, like, you know, it still could be very scary to play against, for sure, for obvious reasons. So, yeah, I've kind of justified bottom of 1.5. Next up, we got Neo Spacians. That is, so there's a lot of different builds of this deck. I'm just showing my main build of the deck, which is the Diva Hero variant. It's still, to this date, I think the best version that I've managed to construct, but I've messed around with a lot of builds of the Spacian deck, and I gotta say, they feel pretty good. They feel pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. Every time I play them, people tell me that it's, like, worse than these other decks in Tier 1.5. It doesn't feel like it to me. Like, deck feels strong. I think, like, the synergy with the Dark package is very good in terms of, like, there's so many, like, good cards that go well with this engine, if you think about it. Like, the obligatory, like, one-offs in terms of, like, Dad, Armageddon Knight, Rhoda, Foolish Burial, Allure, that just kind of go well with this engine. Very strong, and then you get to all play Sork also. Like, it enables a lot. It gives you a cool, like, draw power and consistency. You know, it turns your Armageddon Knight into, like, a Stratos for any Spacian. Grand Mole is searchable, and Grand Mole's a really good card. Like, the other ones provide some decent utility even sometimes. Lets you set up your graveyard. It just, like, does a lot of stuff, and doesn't actually require playing as many Garnets as people really think. Like, the only ones that are really bad to draw, like, Glow Moss, and then sometimes the other. Yeah, I mean, the engine is, in terms of, like, the bricky cards, a lot smaller than people think it is, and then it also just, like, goes with a lot of really powerful cards that you do want to draw. I think that very interesting in terms of deck building. I think the Spacian decks are pretty strong. Like, I play them, they always feel really good. I'm gonna put it in 1.5, bottom of 1.5. Just, you know, this might upset people, though. This might upset people. Maybe I'll put it down in 2. We'll put it top of 2. Just try to be a little bit less controversial, but I'm pretty high on the Spacians recently. I think the version that topped is very good. I mean, my version that topped. The other version that topped felt like kind of trash when I played it, not gonna lie. I'm not trying to shit on the person that built that one. I just didn't really get it. Maybe if I played it more, I would understand, but I think my builds are decent. Maybe Maybe if I played them a little more, I'd feel more strongly about putting it up in 1.5, but we can just toss it down in 2 so people don't get pissed off at me for gassing Spacians too hard. Alright, whatever. Chaos Fairy. Alright, I gotta gas myself one time on this whole list. I'm putting this in tier 1. Every time I play this deck, it feels like the greatest deck in the entire format. I'm not gonna lie. People always tell me it's worse than the other fairy builds, and you're all just wrong. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. You picked up the deck once and you drew some awkward hand with Caius and Christia, and you decided it was bad. But in practice, this is like by far, I think, the best deck I've ever played. I'm not gonna put it above all these other ones in tier 1 because that'll upset people too much. But I really think the deck is extremely powerful. It would be my go-to in terms of if I was just being like completely serious and competitive. I think the deck is really strong. I think it's stronger than regular fairy build. I think it like takes out all these weird cards like Freed and Soul and lets you play these chaos monsters instead, which are actually decent bosses. Like, I think you need to be on Decree and fairies. Decree is so insane. It like stops you from having to play around battle traps or torrential, which like normally own you. I think Fader is really good. It stops you from getting OTK'd, which is how you generally lose with fairies, given that you're this sort of like tempo oriented. The regular build just has this weakness of like getting behind on tempo, and then you just kind of get aggroed down and lose. Whereas this deck's not really a problem because you have the Faders and you have the Caiuses, which are just better removal than anything regular fairies plays. So I think this is just the best fairy deck. I think it's the best Christie deck. I know, controversial take. People hate on me for it, but my opinion on this has really been solidified. I've played this deck a good bit since topping, and it definitely just feels like the strongest version to me. So yeah, I'm putting it in tier 1. You haters can screw off. You got to give me one on this whole list. All right, one cope pick on this whole list. I put Spacians in like mid whatever. I put Karez in mid whatever. Maybe I could even put Karez down here. I don't know. But yeah, Chaos Fairy tier 1. You could eat shit if you disagree. All right, gadgets. This deck doesn't really do much, right? It's just like never tops, and it's very metagame dependent, very matchup dependent. I think tier 3 is like tier 2.5 is the very best I could give it. I'll put it out of tier 3 because sometimes it can be like annoying to play against. It just sort of depends. I think that its matchups are not particularly good, but like if you get the right sort of setup in like a slow game and can just grind out, then maybe it can be solid. But usually gadgets just aren't very good, I think. And then Cyber Dragon's a big issue as well. It's probably the machine deck that loses hardest to Cyber Dragon. Maybe Ancient Gears lose harder to Cyber Dragon, actually. Like, the Makina deck actually doesn't care as much about Cyber Dragon compared to these two. You usually play around it very efficiently. You play a lot of, like, out-of-engine, non-machine stuff. But these other two get completely owned by Cyber Dragon. I can't really justify putting it higher than 2.5. I think it's more around the level of these decks, so yeah. I even put the Zeta deck in here for the fans. I don't really think this deck even belongs on the list. I think it's very bad. I've played tons of versions of it. I've never played one that didn't feel like just absolute dog, so yeah, tier 3. Sorry, what can you do? This deck sucks. The deck just sucks. I'm sorry to like rain on your buyouts, but I really, as a big Zeta fan, I've got to tell you that Zeta is not very good. So yeah. Monster Mash. This is another one that's like weird that I even included this because I don't think this is ever topped ever. It's really got some tough matchups and like inherent issues in terms of just not playing any defense. It's kind of an issue. Blackwings will destroy you. That being said, sometimes against Monster Mash, if you like aren't playing the right matchup or don't have the right cards to stop them, they can just like go too positive and like plus into Oblivion and destroy you. But it doesn't happen much. I think Monster Mash is pretty bad. Where do I think for Monster? Maybe I'll put it 2.5. Does this count as a cope pick? I'm not sure. It's like probably not as bad as tier 3 decks here down. Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as these. I think it's more on the level of these. So I'm going to put it in 2.5, but like bottom of 2.5 because Not playing spell traps is actually a pretty huge issue. We don't have Birdman yet either, which makes that deck a lot stronger. It can do some cool stuff, but it's just like really missing a lot and really fundamentally weak. So I regret, but I put Monster Mash near the bottom. Finally, we have Macro Stun. This is a deck that's kind of emerged recently. I think it topped a couple times. It's just like an abysmal, horrible, painful-looking mess of it. Oh my god. I hope I never have to play against this. This just looks... Oh, why are you doing this? That being said, I've always been super low on stun decks. I think they're like very fundamentally weak, especially given the prevalence of Hero Beat and Blackwings, which I think inherently just destroy stun. That being said, it's not as bad as the tier 3 decks. I'm going to put it down in 2.5 somewhere. Maybe top of 2.5. It has topped a couple events recently. I don't expect that to continue. Like I said, I have a very low opinion of stun decks. So maybe you think this deck is higher, but I've also played some macro stun builds, and I always just draw these awkward-ass hands that do nothing. You know, they got all these redundant floodgates and this whole weird protect the castle strategy, and you don't main deck Heavy Storm. It just feels weird and bad to me. So yeah, that's my finalized version of the tier list. Probably gonna get a lot of shit for putting Chaos Fairies in tier 1, but you guys just need to get woke. That's all I gotta say. Everything else I think is fairly non-controversial. Maybe there's some things that people think I put too low or too high in the middle somewhere, but yeah, I think this is a reasonable tier list. We showed off all the deck lists, of course, which people always like. So let me know what you thought in the comment section. What do you got in tier 1? What do you got in the garbage bin? Yeah, I'll see you next time. Peace out. As always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Furthermore, if you enjoy my content, you should think about becoming a channel member. You get access to tons of bonus content, and it's a great way to help support the channel.